My manager just told the entire executive board that I cost the company a $3 million account. He stood there and watched me cry, smirking behind his hand, knowing he was the one who sabotaged the files. He thought he was safe because he used his admin powers to wipe our email thread and rewrite history. But he forgot one thing. I wasn't just his assistant. I was the one who set up the backup server. And I kept every single receipt. Bradley Kent slammed the report on the mahogany table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You ruined the Apex account, Lena. The presentation files were never sent. My chest tightened until it felt like my ribs might snap. I looked around the room at the senior partners, their eyes filled with cold disappointment. I knew I had sent those files, but Brad had stood over my desk and told me to hold off for a last-minute look. Now he was performing a masterclass in gaslighting. Victoria, the director, glared at me. We'll discuss your employment after this meeting, Lena. Clear your desk. I felt the floor drop out from under me as Brad gave me a look of pure, predatory triumph. The walk from the boardroom to the restroom felt like a mile-long gauntlet of shame. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues burning into my back, their hushed whispers following me like a toxic cloud. I locked myself in the handicapped stall and let out a sat that had been clawing at my throat. I grabbed a rough paper towel and pressed it to my eyes, trying to stop the shaking. The injustice was a physical weight, a suffocating pressure. I had worked 60-hour weeks for 3 months, missing my sister's engagement party for this project, only to be thrown under the bus by the man who was supposed to mentor me. I checked my phone and saw a notification on the internal app. Brad had already posted a project postmortem to the entire department, blaming administrative oversight in my department for the loss. He was poisoning the well before I could even defend myself. He wanted me gone so no one would look closer at his own failures. Just then, an email pinged. HR had scheduled a formal incident review for Monday morning. They were moving with terrifying speed to finalize my termination based on Brad's lies. When the office cleared out for lunch, I found Brad in the break room, casually stirring a cup of coffee as if he hadn't just tried to end my life. I marched up to him, my voice trembling with rage. Brad, how could you do that? You were standing right there when you told me to wait on those files. He didn't look at me at first. He took a slow sip of his coffee and then smirked, a cold, calculated expression that made my blood run cold. You're new here, Lena, he whispered, leaning in close. In this world, someone always has to take the fall. Take the blame gracefully, and maybe I can talk Victoria into a decent severance. Fight it, and I'll make sure you never work in this city again. I stared at him, my mouth agape. He was gaslighting me in broad daylight. He turned and walked away, and I rushed to my computer to pull up our email exchange. My heart stopped. The shared project folder was empty. Every single message from the last 48 hours had been purged. Brad had used his admin privileges to delete the entire thread, leaving me with absolutely nothing. A wave of pure panic washed over me as I scrolled through the empty folders. The digital trail was gone. Brad had been thorough. He had wiped the shared drive and even the archived messages. I felt a deep sense of hurt, not just because of the job, but because I had actually trusted him. He had been the one to hire me, the one who told me I had huge potential. It was all a setup. He needed a convenient scapegoat for his own procrastination. I sat at my desk, head in my hands, trying to think through the fog of betrayal. Then, a spark of memory flickered. 3 weeks ago, I had CC'd the client's assistant, Juliana, on an update. I searched my sent folder frantically, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. But the folder was empty. My screen flickered, and I realized with horror that Brad was currently logged into the server as an admin. He was wiping my local sent items in real time. I watched as the emails vanished right before my eyes. He was erasing me, bit by bit, ensuring there would be no ghost of the truth left to haunt him. I was about to give up when a shadow fell over my desk. It was Nate, a quiet systems analyst who sat in the cubicle next to mine. He didn't look at me. He just kept his eyes on his monitor. He's thorough, isn't he? Nate whispered, his voice barely audible. I looked at him, started. You saw? I asked. Nate nodded almost imperceptibly. Brad's been doing this for years. He deleted half the team's files before the last internal audit to hide his own budget overruns. He thinks he's invisible because he has Victoria's ear. My heart started to beat again. Nate, he wiped everything. I have no proof for the HR hearing on Monday. Nate finally turned to look at me, a small, defiant glint in his eyes. He leaned in and lowered his voice. Brad is arrogant. He thinks he's the only one with admin skills. I once backed up the entire project's communication thread to a private, off-site archive for reference because I didn't trust his numbers. I still have the access keys. He's deleting the company's copies, but he hasn't touched my private mirror server yet. That night, I sat in my darkened apartment, my laptop screen the only source of light. My hands were shaking as I waited for the file from Nate. Then, the ping of an incoming message echoed through the room. I opened the attachment, and there it was, the hidden thread. It was a digital map of Brad's betrayal. Every single message was preserved with original timestamps and metadata headers. I scrolled down to the afternoon of the Apex deadline. Hold off on sending the final files until I review the budget figures one last time. Brad had written at 2:15 p.m. I replied at 2:30 p.m., reminding him the deadline was 4 p.m. His final reply at 3:45 p.m. was the smoking gun. I'll handle the submission myself. Don't send anything. But the most shocking part was an email he sent an hour later to Victoria, claiming, I've approved everything on time, but Lena seems to be struggling with the final upload. He had been setting the trap for hours before the deadline even passed. He didn't just fail. He actively sabotaged me to make himself look like the savior who tried to help a struggling employee. I spent the rest of the weekend in a state of cold, calculated focus. I didn't cry anymore. Instead, I became an investigator. I printed every email, highlighted the contradictions, and verified the IP addresses associated with the admin deletions. I realized that Brad hadn't just lied about the files. He had manipulated the company's internal records, which was a fireable offense. I prepared a digital dossier, documenting the timestamps of when he logged into my account to delete my sent items. I was careful not to tell anyone, not even Nate, the full extent of what I had found. I knew that if Brad got wind of the fact that the thread still existed, he would find a way to destroy the archive. My strategy was simple. I would let Brad lie himself into a corner during the HR hearing. I wanted him to commit his false version of events to the official record before I revealed the truth. I barely slept, the adrenaline of the upcoming confrontation keeping me wide awake. I felt like a hunter waiting in the tall grass for a predator to step into the clearing. Monday morning arrived with a gray, oppressive sky. I walked into the HR office, my shoulders back and my dossier tucked inside a plain manila folder. Brad was already there, sitting next to Victoria and the HR manager, Henderson. Brad looked like the picture of professional concern. He even had the audacity to give me a small, pitying nod. We're here to discuss the loss of the Apex account, Henderson began. Bradley, would you like to summarize? Brad sighed dramatically. It's heartbreaking. I did my part to guide the project, but Lena just missed the critical deadlines. I gave her every opportunity to succeed, but she went silent in the final hours. Victoria frowned, her eyes boring into mine. Do you have any proof to offer, Lena? Or any explanation for why you ignored your manager's directives? I looked Brad dead in the eye, seeing the tiny, streaky smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He thought he had won. I'll submit my proof this afternoon, I said quietly. But first, I'd like Brad to clarify exactly which files he claims I failed to send and when he last checked the folder. Brad didn't hesitate. He spent the next 20 minutes spinning a web of lies, detailing exactly how I supposedly fumbled the communication. He even invented a story about me confessing my stress to him in the hallway. I watched him, fascinated by his lack of a conscience. Victoria and Henderson were nodding along, clearly convinced by his polished performance. I decided to test the waters. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, a summary of the project timeline, but I deliberately left out the hold-off email. I wanted to see if he would double down. Is this the timeline you remember, Brad? I asked. He glanced at it and scoffed. This is a fabrication, Lena. I never saw this. Again, You're just trying to cover your tracks after failing the team. He was so confident in his deletion of the thread that he didn't realize he was walking into a minefield. The meeting ended with Victoria telling me I was on administrative leave, pending a final decision. As I walked back to my office to grab my coat, Brad followed me, slamming my door shut to confront me. You think you're clever, don't you? Brad hissed, his face inches from mine. The mask of the concerned manager was gone, replaced by a feral aggression. I told you to take the fall. I deleted that thread, Lena. Every single byte of it. There is no trail. You're going to walk out of here with a disgraced reputation and nothing in your bank account. He was shouting now, his ego blinded by the belief that he had successfully erased the truth. What he didn't realize was that I had started a recording app on my phone, and even better, the conference bridge for our next department meeting was already live on my computer. His voice was being broadcasted to the IT room where Nate was sitting, and it was being recorded by the company's security software. He had just admitted to deleting corporate records. You really shouldn't scream in the office, Brad, I said calmly. It's unprofessional. He let out a jagged laugh and stormed out, thinking he had intimidated me into silence. I saved the audio file to a private drive immediately. The CEO of the kitchen was about to meet the real Lena. With the audio of his confession secured, I reached out to Nate again. Check the consulting fees for the Apex project, I messaged him. Nate did a deep dive into the accounting software and found a series of suspicious payments. Brad had been funneling project funds, totaling nearly $180,000, into a company called K Consulting. Nate cross-referenced the business registration and found that K Consulting was owned by Brad's brother. One of the emails in the hidden thread showed Brad directing me to approve those specific invoices under the guise of external research. Now I realized I had been made an unwitting acknowledgement to his fraud. The stakes had moved beyond a failed project. This was a criminal embezzlement scheme. Brad hadn't just blamed me for the project to save his ego. He had done it to ensure that when the audit happened, all eyes would be on my incompetence, rather than his theft. If the project had succeeded, the budget would have been scrutinized. By making it a failure, he hoped the company would just write it off and fire the person responsible for the errors. He was using my career to bury his crimes. I knew I couldn't go back to Victoria yet. She was too close to Brad. Instead, I contacted the company's compliance officer, Miller, who was known for being an absolute shark. I sent him the entire dossier anonymously from an encrypted email address. I included the email thread, the audio recording, and the links to the fraudulent consulting fees. I didn't mention my name. I just titled the email, Apex Project Malfeasance Report. I waited in an agony of suspense for the rest of the day. Around 4 p.m., I saw Miller walking toward Victoria's office with a team of 2 auditors. They didn't stop to talk to anyone. They walked in and closed the door. 10 minutes later, I saw Nate give me a subtle thumbs up from his desk. An internal audit had begun, and the first thing they did was freeze Brad's access to the accounting server. He was at his desk, trying to log in, his face turning a panicked shade of red as the access denied message kept popping up. My personal phone rang at 5 p.m. It was Miller. Lena? I think we need to have a very private conversation. The next morning, the energy in the office had shifted entirely. Brad looked rattled. His usual easy charm was replaced by a twitchy, nervous energy. He kept looking toward Victoria's office, but the door remained shut. During our weekly staff update, he stumbled through his words, his hands shaking as he held his tablet. He tried to make eye contact with me, perhaps trying to see if I knew anything, but I kept my gaze fixed on my notebook. He was a cornered animal. The compliance team was already in his office, going through his physical files and his laptop. Rumors were starting to fly. Someone had heard that the authorities might be involved. Still, the fear in Brad's eyes was real. Just as the meeting was breaking up, Miller stepped into the room. He didn't look at Brad.
He looked at me.
Lena Morales, could you step into my office for a private interview, please? The entire room went silent as I stood up. Brad's jaw dropped as he realized that the disgraced employee he had tried to bury was now the key witness in his own downfall. Inside the interview room, I laid everything out. I handed over the USB drive with the original email thread and explained the entire chain of events. Miller listened with a stony expression, taking meticulous notes. When I played the audio of Brad admitting he deleted the files, Miller actually leaned back and let out a long breath. "This is more than just a project failure, Lena. This is a systematic violation of corporate ethics and potentially state law." He thanked me for my courage and told me to return to my desk, but warned me not to discuss the investigation with anyone. As I walked back through the department, I saw Brad sitting in his glass-walled office, his head in his hands. His calendar for the rest of the week was suddenly clearing. Every single one of his meetings had been canceled by the executive suite. He was being isolated, his influence stripped away in real time. The hunter was now the prey, and the office was watching his slow-motion collapse with a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. I sat at my desk and opened a new spreadsheet, finally able to breathe again. By Wednesday, the office was a hive of speculation. Everyone knew something massive was happening. IT had officially collected Brad's laptop and phone, and he had been seen being escorted to a secondary conference room by two men in suits. The whispers about Lena being the one who cost us the account had died down, replaced by a wary respect. Colleagues who had ignored me for 3 days were suddenly bringing me coffee and asking if I was okay. I stayed focused on my work, helping Nate reconstruct the project data that Brad had tried to destroy. Around 2 p.m., a black SUV pulled up to the front. The company's vice president, a man who rarely visited our branch, flew in from headquarters. He didn't go to Victoria's office. He went straight to the boardroom and called an emergency all-hands meeting for 4:30 p.m. The tension was unbearable. Brad was nowhere to be seen. He had been sequestered in that conference room for 6 hours. I knew the axe was about to fall, but I didn't know how heavy it would be. The all-hands meeting was the shortest and most intense I had ever attended. The VP stood at the front, his expression grim. He announced that the company was conducting an ongoing internal review into serious mismanagement, record tampering, and financial irregularities. He didn't name names, but he didn't have to. Brad was brought into the room to sit in the back row, his face the color of ash. He looked diminished, his expensive suit suddenly looking 3 sizes too big. When the meeting adjourned, the silence was deafening. I tried to walk past Brad to get to the elevator, but he grabbed my arm. "You did this," he hissed, his voice trembling with hate. "You think you've won? You've destroyed a career I spent 15 years building. You'll regret the day you ever crossed me, Lena. I have friends in this industry you can't even imagine." I pulled my arm away and looked him in the eye, feeling no fear, only a cold clarity. "I didn't destroy your career, Brad. Your own invoices did that. You should have focused on the project instead of the consulting fees." Brad didn't go down without a fight. The next morning, a series of anonymous emails were sent to the entire department claiming that I was the one who had leaked sensitive company data to a competitor and that I was framing Brad to cover my own tracks. He was trying to burn the whole house down. HR called me in again to clarify these new allegations. Victoria looked conflicted. She wanted to believe her star manager was innocent. I sat down and didn't say a word. I simply pulled out my phone and played the recorded clip of him from the parking lot where he admitted his career was destroyed because he blamed the wrong person. Then, I showed them the timestamps of the anonymous emails. They had been sent from a private VPN, but the writing style and specific grammatical errors matched Brad's perfectly. The compliance officer looked at Victoria and shook his head. "It's over, Victoria. He's digging his own grave." The cliffhanger came when IT walked in with a final report. They had traced the VPN back to a guest Wi-Fi account Brad had accessed from his phone. The evidence was now an avalanche. IT confirmed that the file deletions had occurred precisely when Brad was logged in with his administrative credentials. But the real blow came from the audit of the consulting fees. They found that the $180,000 hadn't just gone to his brother. It had been used to pay off personal gambling debts that Brad had accumulated. He had been using the Apex project as a personal piggy bank. The failed project wasn't an accident. He had deliberately sabotaged the final stages to prevent a full-scale review of the expenses, hoping a quick firing of a junior employee would bury the truth forever. When Victoria saw the final report, she put her face in her hands. She realized that by trusting Brad, she had nearly allowed a criminal to ruin an innocent woman's life. The company VP authorized an immediate termination for cause. Brad Kent was no longer an employee. Security was called to escort him from the building, and the quiet dignity of the office was restored as his name was scrubbed from the directory. I watched from the window as he was led away. Brad was allowed to collect his personal items under the watchful eye of security. As he walked toward the parking lot, carrying a single cardboard box, he saw me standing by the window. He dropped the box and tried to storm toward the building, but security blocked him. He stood in the middle of the pavement, screaming at the top of his lungs. "You destroyed me, Lena. You're a rat. You'll never be anything in this business." I didn't hide. I walked out the front door and stood on the steps, looking down at him. The power dynamic had shifted so completely. "You did this to yourself, Brad," I said, my voice carrying across the quiet flight. "You had a team that respected you, and you treated them like shields. You didn't lose your career because of an email thread. You lost it because you were a thief who blamed the wrong person for his own mistakes." Security shoved him toward his car, his screaming fading as he was forced to leave. The $180,000 fraud was now a police matter, and the smirk he had worn in the boardroom was gone forever. The fallout was swift. Corporate sent out an official memo. Brad Kent had been terminated for gross misconduct and financial fraud. The atmosphere in the office changed from fear to immense relief. People were literally hugging each other. The Apex project, which everyone thought was dead, was back on the table. The client, having heard about the internal restructuring, expressed interest in a follow-up. Victoria called me into her office, her eyes red. "Lena, I owe you a formal apology. I let my personal bias cloud my judgment." She handed me a file. "The VP wants to relaunch the Apex account, and he's reassigning the lead role to you, temporarily. He wants to see if you can save it." I felt a lump in my throat. I wasn't just being cleared, I was being given the reins. But the cliffhanger came when my desk phone rang 5 minutes later. It was the VP's secretary. "The VP would like to see you in his private suite. He has a proposal that goes beyond just one project." I walked toward the executive elevators, my heart racing with a different kind of adrenaline. I walked into the VP's suite, my heart pounding. He wasn't sitting behind his desk, he was standing by the window. He turned and gave me a genuine smile. "Lena, Victoria told me how you handled this. You showed more integrity and discretion in 3 days than most managers show in a decade. You protected the company while being attacked by your own supervisor." He walked over and handed me a new contract. "We don't want you to lead the release, temporarily. We want you to take over Brad's former position as the regional project director. You've earned the trust of the executive board." I could barely breathe. I had gone from the brink of unemployment to a promotion that usually took 10 years to achieve. I thanked him, my voice thick with emotion. But as I walked back to my new office, my phone buzzed with an email from an external address. It was a journalist from a major business publication. "We've heard rumors of a scandal at your company regarding Bradley Kent. We're going to press tonight. Would you like to comment on the record about the whistleblower culture?" The story hit LinkedIn and the regional business news the following Monday morning. The headline was blunt. "Project manager fired after framing junior employee in $180,000 embezzlement scheme." The article didn't name me directly, but it detailed the bravery of a whistleblower who had used archived digital evidence to stop a predatory manager. My phone was flooded with messages of support from former colleagues and even competitors. The industry was small, and the news that I had stood up to a bully like Brad made me an overnight hero. I was invited to speak at a Women in Tech panel about workplace ethics. The final line of the news article quoted an anonymous statement, mine, about how workplace ethics isn't just about following rules, it's about the courage to keep the receipts. I felt a sense of closure I never expected. I wasn't the girl who got blamed. I was the woman who changed the culture of the entire office. Brad's name was now synonymous with failure and fraud, while mine was associated with the ultimate professional victory. I had saved the account and my reputation. 3 weeks later, the promotion was finalized. I moved into the large office Brad used to occupy, but the first thing I did was take down the dark curtains and let the light in. I promoted Nate to lead systems analyst, ensuring he had the recognition he deserved for helping me. The office felt lighter, more collaborative. But one evening, as I was leaving the building late, I found a small, handwritten note tucked under my windshield wiper. There was no return address. I opened it and felt a chill run down my spine. "You ruined my life, Lena. You think you're safe in that big office? Watch your back. I haven't forgotten what you took from me." The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Brad's jagged, angry scrawl. He was out of a job and barred from the industry, but he was still watching from the shadows. I looked around the dark parking lot, my heart hammering. He had nothing left to lose, which made him dangerous. I realized that while I had won the corporate war, the personal battle might not be over yet. I didn't panic. I didn't hide the note or cry. I took a photo of it and forwarded it directly to corporate security and the police department as part of my ongoing restraining order file. I realized that Brad's threats were the dying gasps of a man who no longer had any power over me. His reputation was in absolute ruins. I had heard he was working a low-level sales job at a strip mall just to make rent. No one in the high-stakes world of corporate finance would ever touch him again. He was a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms. I received an email that afternoon from the Apex client, the one Brad had blamed me for losing. "We've been following the news, Lena. We'd like to officially resume our contract with your company, but only under one condition, that you are the sole point of contact for the duration of the project. We trust your integrity." I smiled softly, looking at the city skyline. The redemption was complete. Brad's shadow was gone, replaced by the bright light of a future I had built myself. At the new project kickoff meeting, the Apex client shook my hand firmly in front of the entire executive board. "You were the only one who told us the truth from the beginning, Lena. We value that more than a fancy presentation." I stood at the head of the mahogany table, looking at the same senior partners who had once glared at me in disappointment. Now they were nodding in approval. I felt a profound sense of peace. I was finally free from the shadow of blame and the toxicity of Bradley Kent. The email thread that saved my career sat archived in a secure folder in my inbox, a quiet, digital reminder that the truth always finds a way out. Brad had tried to erase me, but in doing so, he had only highlighted my strength. As the meeting concluded, I walked back to my office and sat at my desk. I opened a new project file and typed the first line. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was leading. He tried to erase my career, but I saved myself with a single, unshakable truth. My worth was never his to define. I am the CEO of my own life.